This is a true story about two men who escaped from the world's strictest prison using a broom. The film, Escape from Pretoria, is set in South Africa during the late 1940s, when the government was carrying out a strict racial segregation policy called apartheid. This system gave the whites more privileges and better jobs, while the black community was discriminated against and often massacred. The protagonist of the movie is Tim Jenkin, a white activist working for the African National Party, ANP. He is heading to a crowded market with two large bags in his hand. He drops one of them near a trash can and the other one next to a car. Then, he signals his accomplice, Stephen Lee, to initiate the plan. It turns out the bags contain explosives, which they plan to detonate right now. They immediately get to work and connect some wires inside the bag. As they walk away, two explosions occur, but they are harmless. However, hundreds of leaflets are scattered across the busy market. They contain propaganda messages against the apartheid government. Jenkin and Lee nervously try to flee the scene, but they are soon apprehended by the cops. Later, while awaiting prosecution, Jenkin's wife sneaks into his room and gives him some money which he may require in prison. Jenkin's wife says goodbye to him, promising to always stay by his side. She sneaks him some money, which he hides in a cigar case and shoves inside him. Yes, you heard it right, inside him. At the court hearing, the judge berates Jenkin and Lee for going against their own race. Jenkin is sentenced to 12 years in prison for manufacturing the bombs, while Lee is given 8 years as an accomplice. Jenkin and Lee are escorted to the notorious Pretoria prison, which is exclusively for white criminals. The warden labels them as traitors and hands them over to a strict prison officer named Meneer. Meneer shows them around the prison, which is reinforced with automatic grill doors, multiple barred gates, and other security systems. It looks impenetrable. Meneer takes Jenkin and Lee to their respective cells, which are reinforced with a grill door followed by a full metal door. That night, Jenkin is lost in his thoughts and barely gets any sleep. The next morning, during breakfast time, Jenkin wanders around the canteen hall until an old man named Dennis Goldberg pulls him aside. Dennis is a senior political activist who is serving 4 life sentences for protesting against the apartheid. Jenkin's accomplice, Stephen Lee, soon joins them, and the three have an interesting conversation about their respective situations. Meanwhile, a French-Australian prisoner named Leonard is seen eavesdropping on their conversation. Dennis briefs Jenkin and Lee during exercise time about the prison's layout. The walls are 32 feet high. The searchlights cover every inch of the yard. The barbed fences are razor sharp, and there are snipers on the roof 24/7. In short, he advises them against trying to escape, as it is virtually impossible. Dennis also reveals that many have attempted a prison break in the past, but all have failed. After Dennis leaves, Leonard approaches Jenkin and Lee. He mentions that Dennis always discourages new inmates from trying to escape, but Leonard knows that it is very much possible. He proposes to help them, and in exchange, he wants to be included in their plan. Jenkin, Lee, and Fontaine are now 23 days into their prison sentence. Life has started to become normal, but Jenkin is determined to escape. One night, Jenkin gets an idea. He uses paper to measure the depth and length of the keyhole in his cell door. He plans to make a makeshift key out of wood. The next day, in the shower, Jenkin presents his idea to Lee and others. Lee is skeptical, but others are convinced that it will work. Jenkin needs to get wood from the workshop, but first, he needs to observe the original keys. He starts looking for opportunities to see the keys up close, whether it be in the front yard or during morning assembly. Finally, after days of research, Jenkin is able to draw a rough draft of a key on paper. On the 74th day, Jenkin steals sandpaper and wood from the workshop. He hides them in his coffee thermos and stuffs a bunch of clothes on top to keep them from rattling. Meneer checks all the prisoners' thermoses individually, but he doesn't find anything suspicious in Jenkin's thermos. After his narrow escape, Jenkin goes straight to his cell and starts working on his first prototype. He chisels, cuts, and scrubs the wood until he finally makes a working key. Jenkin nervously tries the key on his cell door, and to his delight, it works. But when he opens the grill door, he realizes that the metal gate doesn't have a keyhole on his side. This means that he will have to open it from the other end. The next morning, Jenkin explains the situation to Lee and others. They agree that they will need to make another key and somehow find a way to open the second gate from outside. Leonard is ecstatic about the success of their first plan, and he is completely on board with the second one. In the following days, the three men observe the keyhole to the outdoor door, and Jenkin tries to make a rough diagram of it. After weeks of hard work, he successfully creates another wooden key. On the 100th day, the boys are mopping the hallway when they notice that there are no guards around. Jenkin takes this opportunity to try out his new key. It is not as good as the first one, so he chisels it to make it smoother. The key fits, and the door opens, much to everyone's joy. However, when Jenkin tries to get the key out, it breaks. This causes panic among the boys. And to make matters worse, a guard starts approaching the hallway. Jenkins tries his best to close the lock. The giant guard is very close, but in the end, he only manages to get the broken piece out right before a giant guard arrives. The next day, Lee suggests using a string, but the others dismiss the idea. Lee then has another idea. He uses a broom to measure the distance from the window to the door. It is just a few inches short. The next day, Jenkins notices a sewing machine in the workshop. He goes back to his cell and develops a similar mechanism, which he then attaches to the broom. That night, he places the wooden K on top of the broom and tries it out. The plan works. He successfully opens the gate. However, when he tries pulling it out, the key falls to the ground. Jenkins sticks a piece of chewing gum on top of the broom and uses it to retrieve the key. The next morning, he tells his friends how he managed to open both gates. He now wants to inspect the other areas of the prison so that they can proceed to the next step. Dennis sees the boys planning their escape and again tells Jenkins to back out. However, Jenkins is determined to escape. 206 days later, the boys are still planning their escape. They try to inspect the surrounding areas whenever they can. Jenkins even strikes a deal with the janitor to get a construction map of the prison. 296 days later, Jenkins and Leonard make dummies in their beds and sneak out of their cells at night. They carefully climb down the stairs until they reach another grill gate. They open the gate just as the giant guard gets up from his seat to go on his night patrol. Jenkins and Leonard hide in the storeroom until the guard is gone. They then continue with their plan. Jenkins opens one more door, but before he can try another one, Lee coughs upstairs, signaling that the giant guard is finished with his patrol. Jenkins and Leonard hide in the storeroom again. On the way to his room, the guard notices sweat droplets on the floor, but he doesn't think much of it. After he leaves, the boys head back upstairs. Jenkins dismantles his keys in several pieces and keeps them inside his cup. He then goes to sleep, hopeful that he can escape and meet his beloved wife soon. The next morning, the warden enters Jenkins' cell and wakes him up. Jenkins has overslept, and the warden is enraged. He searches the cell and finds the wooden parts of the keys hidden in a cup. Jenkins nervously says that he made the keys as a photo holder, and surprisingly, the warden believes him. However, the warden warns Jenkins to be more careful next time. That night, Jenkins had a panic attack. He knows that he has to be careful, but he is also determined to escape. The next morning, Jenkins starts hiding the keys in different areas of the prison. He also manages to steal civilian clothes from the laundry with his friends. Meanwhile, Jenkins doesn't clean or brush his teeth, hoping that he will get an infection. A few weeks later, he does get one, and when he is taken to the doctor, he inspects the automatic gate. On Christmas Eve, Jenkins, Leonard, and Lee disclose their elaborate escape plan to Dennis and his friends. They have made 39 keys of different shapes and sizes for the 15 doors that they have to pass. However, Dennis refuses to join them, claiming that even if they escape, they will have nowhere to go. Later, the warden conducts a search of all the cells, including Jenkins. He doesn't find anything, and in the evening, after all the officers are gone, Jenkins, Leonard, and Lee begin their escape. Before leaving the hallway, Jenkins asks Dennis one last time if he wants to join them, but again gets a negative response. The boys then gather all the keys that they have hidden in different corners of the prison and begin their journey towards freedom. The boys are getting closer to their goal, but they still have many challenges ahead of them. The boys dressed up in civilian clothes and headed downstairs. Suddenly, they heard footsteps. It was the giant guard approaching. They quickly hid in the storeroom, trembling in fear. The guard arrived and noticed the door shaking, but before he could inspect it, the electricity went out. Dennis had caused a short circuit by destroying his light bulb. The boys started calling out for the guard, hoping to distract him. It worked, and the guard reluctantly headed upstairs. They wasted no time getting out of the storeroom and rushing to the next door. With teamwork and their desire to reunite with their families, they managed to open the doors one after another. When it was time for the automatic gate, Leonard quickly went to the admin room and opened it by pressing a button. Everything was going as planned, and they finally reached the final door, the door to freedom. However, to their horror, none of the keys worked. Months of planning and hard work had been foiled by one single lock. Jenkins suggested that they go back to their cells, but Leonard was not ready to give up so easily. He brought out his chisel and started pounding on the door lock. This made a lot of noise, but the plan worked. Leonard managed to break the lock and the door finally opened. The final obstacle was the sniper on the tower. However, since the boys were dressed in civilian clothes, they confidently headed out. No one suspected them, not even Munir, who was having a conversation with someone nearby. After the boys reached a safe location, they ran until they reached the city. Then, they got inside a cab and asked the driver to drop them off at the border. The driver hesitated at first since they were white, but when Jenkins brought out his wad of cash, he agreed. In this way, Jenkins, Leonard, and Lee finally escaped the prison after a year and a half of captivity. The next morning, Munir learns about the escape and tries to raise the alarm, but it's already too late. He looks around, feeling helpless, while Dennis and the others burst into laughter. In the last part of the story, we find out what really happened after they escaped from prison. The biggest search operation ever in South Africa began, but they couldn't catch the escapees. They made their way across the border to Mozambique, then Tanzania, and finally reached London. There, they reunited with the ANC and kept protesting against apartheid. After more than a decade in prison, Dennis and Jenkin were pardoned in 1991 and 1985, respectively. Dennis was reunited with his wife and children, but Jenkin's wife had passed away during his imprisonment. In 1992, apartheid fell, and 2 years later, Nelson Mandela, the leader of the African National Congress, was elected president of South Africa. If you love our work, please consider subscribing to the channel.